Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Wall, and today we have a special guest who is actually my first mentor in the world of strength and conditioning. Ben Prentiss is founder of Prentiss Hockey Performance, and he's widely regarded as one of the world's best, if not the best, hockey strength and conditioning coach. I first met Ben over 20 years ago when he gave me my first job in the fitness industry coming out of university. I had had some experience with athletic training at UMB with our hockey team who had won nationals, but nothing close to what he was doing in New York.
8, 9, hey boy, outside we go.
He had just started a new private training facility just outside the city in Connecticut. At the time, Ben was just getting into training elite athletes, but since then, he's gone on to become the premier trainer for professional hockey players. Ben himself was mentored by Canadian strength coaching legend Charles Poliquin, who introduced him to training pro hockey players. Ever since that first experience, he never looked back and has since refined his own philosophy, which has helped shape the careers of hundreds of NHL players. He's trained Hall of Famers, MVPs, Stanley Cup winners, Conn Smythe Trophy and Hart Trophy winners, and the list goes on. To date, Ben has trained hockey players from all 30 NHL teams and is now the strength and conditioning consultant for the New York Rangers. Well, Ben joined me from his home in Connecticut to talk about his experiences training pros for the last 20 years, some things athletes and coaches should know, and to provide some do's and don'ts for aspiring hockey players. It was great to learn about all the amazing things he's done since I last saw him. So let's check it out. Welcome to the show, Ben. It's great to see you.
Great to see you again. I appreciate it.
All right. So can you give me a bit of a background on what your evolution was? How did you become the guru for hockey training?
You know, like most things, it sort of started as one thing and kind of morphed into another. So, you know, when in 1999/2000, I opened up body tuning in a gas station, you know, the idea was there was no sports performance places. The model didn't exist. You know, I was coming out of university where I was training people out of World Gym and in their homes. And, you know, this was more of a bodybuilding time in the 90s. And, you know, me being an athlete and me being interested in sports and hooking on to Charles Poliquin sort of as my early mentor when I was in college, you know, following his stuff, that was my main influence. And as time went on, I took people's ideologies and made my own philosophy and made my own system. So one by one got high school athlete. And when I went to start working for Charles in the summertime, training NFL and NHL guys, that kind of opened my eyes to the world of training athletes. That was in like 2002. And then I did that for a few years. Then as I came back, I started getting one guy after another. And you know, again, there was no social media. The only way you got athletes is by results. And it wasn't about advertising or that stuff. It was just about producing. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we produced whatever that means, right? I mean, hockey's a team sport. So, you know, it's how you quantify it. But yeah. So that's kind of how it manifests itself into one guy and another. And then teams came and you know, I started with 4 coaches, and you were there kind of in the beginning, sort of at the end of it. I mean, it was just, we would do, you know, like 340 sessions, 500 sessions a week. Wow. In that place with like 13 trainers. It was just, guys, we rented a pod and put the pod outside, and we had turf outside, and, you know, it was just, so it was time to move. And now this is our 5th year, and we're in a twin rink where we have 12,000 square feet. We have, you know, timing gates, force plates, 1080 technology, on ice, off ice. We have soft tissue practitioners. You know, you name it, we have it. So it's ran the spectrum in the course of 21 years, basically.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. Like you said, it wasn't existing beforehand. And you came from a background, you spent some time in California as a kid next to like the classic Venice Beach, right?
Right. So, yeah, well, that's sort of, you know, that goes way back in that, you know, my father was a power lifter. So when I was 2 years old, he basically took my mother and I across country to train at Venice Beach at Gold's Gym. And, at the time, Gold's Gym wasn't just for bodybuilders. This is, 1974. It was for everybody. So, whether it's true or not, my dad likes to tell stories about him bringing me in a crib and putting me in a corner, and Arnold would come over and make googly faces at me and that kind of thing. And, Dave Draper was Arnold's training partner at the time, the blonde bomber. And, my father, I have pictures of Dave Draper in my office made out to me. Him and my father were friendly. And so I don't know how long we were there, but, he trained there for probably 3 or 4 years. So yeah, you could say it was in my blood, and, then becoming an athlete and then sort of coming full circle to the training.
Yeah, right. And so you migrated into hockey. Who are some of the athletes that you're training now? Because you train a lot of different people.
Yeah, so going to Spectrum, my first NHL athlete that was, on my own, meaning I was responsible for that, I didn't train through Charles, was Jason Arnott, who won a Stanley Cup early on and had a great 16 years. He's from Wasaga Beach in Toronto, and he was my very first. And then actually locally, Ryan Shannon, who actually, crazy enough, lived in my hometown, the hometown of my gym, and went on to win a Stanley Cup for the Anaheim Ducks, and, had a good NHL career with the Tampa Bay Lightning and Ottawa Senators. And then it went on to, obviously, the biggest names of Marty St. Louis, who, I was fortunate enough to, he trusted me in his career. And, I say all the time, he would have had a Hall of Fame career whether or not he met me. But, I was lucky to be a part of that. And I went to the Hall of Fame speech where he, gave me a little shout out. And
to present Marty St. Louis' plaque from the Hall of Fame class of 2017, Dave Andrechuk.
I believe it is important to surround yourself with good people. My agent, Louis Gross, my trainer, Ben Prentice, Bill Wickett, who works for the Lightning. Thank you for everything. Thank you for everything through the years.
And I still train Marty to this day. And then moving on, obviously, I still train Max Pacioretty. This is 11 years with him, going through the Masterton Trophy where, obviously he broke his neck and went through all that. And now currently, I work for the New York Rangers as a strength and conditioning consultant. That's kind of a thing where I'm not really allowed to talk about it other than, I train their prospects. So every summer I get 10 to 12 prospects that I train for them. So they have that. And then independently on the Rangers, I have Chris Kreider, Brendan Smith, Brett Howden, Mika Zibanejad comes for about a month when it comes from Sweden, Hedel, Hychek, Shostorkin. They kind of come in for about a month before we go. And then right now I'm very close with Kreider, obviously. So I've trained him for many years. He's here now. Other prospects, again, I have to be hush about, but John Hayden from the New Jersey Devils, who's with me. Trevor Zegras, who's a first rounder for the Anaheim Ducks. He's here now. Sonny Milano, who's with the Anaheim Ducks, is with us right now. Adam Fox with the Rangers is with us. I'm probably forgetting a few that are currently with us, but, Patrick Harper, who is signed with Nashville, he's here with us. So, that's a few of the guys that we have currently.
Wow. So that's a pretty impressive roster there. And, a lot of those people have accomplished some amazing things, like Marty St. Louis was MVP. When you take these athletes, I know that you have a different approach towards how you work with them. You don't give them a quote unquote hockey program. How do you approach these different athletes when you're working with them? Yeah.
You hate to say the word or the phrase, it depends, or, it's specific, but it really is. And for that reason, the model that I started 21 years ago, we still use today, in that we only train guys 2 per 1 coach at the most. You learn different things, obviously, and you try different things and you see what works. And now with force plates and with the 1080 and with our body fat system, we're able to really quantify weekly if guys are getting better. And what young people have to understand in the strength and conditioning is you can't freak out and expect them to be on a trajectory, because if, say, they're on I'll explain later kind of about my system, but, in general, depending on what block they're on, they might go down in their sprint, or if they're skating more, or they might go down in their vertical jump, which, a young person would freak out and think, okay, they're not getting better or they're fatiguing. But the fact of the matter is that's going to happen in peaks and valleys, depending on your block. If they're just going straight up, then you're probably not training them the right way. Within each cycle, we're measuring and testing. So each week we have a data guy that puts out for our staff a weekly report. And on that report, we'll have vertical jump, we'll have an RSI, we'll have a broad jump, and we'll have a 10-yard or 10-meter, depending on where you're coming from, sprint. Yeah. And those are the things that we look at weekly. Mm-hmm. And then monthly, we'll look at body fat, on-iced sprint, change of direction as we start to get further on into their training. Mm-hmm. Those are things that 20 years ago, regardless of what you're reading, you don't know these things until you really experience them and are able to kind of quantify them.
We're here with Ben Prentiss, NHL strength and conditioning coach. When we come back, he'll walk us through how he trains his athletes as we spend today's episode diving into the world of sport performance. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're here with Ben Prentiss, NHL strength coach. In this segment, I asked him about establishing a baseline for his athletes and some of the fundamentals he preaches, including sleep and diet. We also clear up some common misconceptions around aerobic training and working out until failure. These are things that all young hockey players should hear if they want to improve their performance. Let's check it out.
I think that everybody thinks that these hockey players are super athletes and that, they're living perfectly. But the role of somebody like you can make a significant difference, because a lot of the time they might not have any background in this and they really need that guidance. What are some of the things that you help coach them on when it comes to, understanding?
We try to, when somebody is sort of all in with us, that's when we feel most comfortable in getting the results. And when we say all in, what we mean is it's not just, 5 or 6 hours of training a week. It's how you're sleeping, which we call sleep hygiene. It's how you're recovering. It's how you're eating. It's how you're managing stress. All of those things will put you into position. So if a guy's not losing body fat and he says he's eating right, well, then we look at his sleep and, how his cortisol is, or how he's recovering, and how is adrenal fatigue. Luckily we have a nutritionist on staff that's able to test those things if need be. Food sensitivity, adrenal, cortisol, full blood panels, those things. I mean, most of the time that's not needed. You can usually do it by just fixing a diet, but in some cases, we go to that. But, young kids who want to talk about taking pre-workout or, what's the supplement to get me? I stop them right there. And, the best supplement is for those guys is 10 hours of sleep and uninterrupted sleep. And, if you're a 14 to 18-year-old kid, you want to recover and you want to get stronger in the gym, get good night's sleep. And that alone with, water and food will typically do it. I mean, that sounds very simple, but your average high school kid is not eating breakfast, is not drinking water, is not eating correctly, is looking at their iPad, which blue light, as we know, is affecting their sleep. And, so all of these things, that's kind of what we say all in is we, for the lack of being hokey, is we incorporate a lifestyle with everything. So we'll tell you how to eat, we'll tell you how to stretch, we'll tell you how to train, and we'll tell you how to recover.
That's awesome. And I know these athletes are also coming in at various stages too, right? So you got people that are young in their career, but you deal with a lot of athletes that are coming in off of grueling seasons.
Yeah. So again, that's sort of what goes down to each training. So we might have 2 people train together that are on different programs because one guy's 3 months in And like, for instance, the Tampa Bay Lightning, we'll have a guy, we have guys on that team where, they're not going to train for a couple weeks here, but when they start training, they're obviously not training with somebody that didn't even go into the bubble who's been training for 6 months. So, you have to take all those things into where you're starting, and you can't ever speed up the process. Guys will be like, hey, I'm going on vacation. Let's do four in a row this week. And, no, you have to have those days off in between training, and no, you can't speed up the process. So yeah, it's specific, and, we're looking at what aerobic work we're going to do. Well, most aerobic work typically is only done in the beginning. Hockey is not an aerobic sport, but as we know, a little bit of aerobic work will help for recovery, and it will help them sort of intra-sets, and it'll help them down the road into moving on to anaerobic, alactic work, which we'll move on to. So, those energy systems change as the phases change. So, yeah, it all is super specific.
No, that's great. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how you approach these athletes after this, but just for the people who are listening, like a lot of people feel that because hockey players are working hard and they're sweating and their heart is beating, that it must be aerobic in nature, but it's not, because shifts are, a minute or less. And so, the way that people train has to be specific. You go get really good at running a marathon. That's not going to translate at all.
No, well, no, not only that, but, long distance aerobic work could affect your immune system. So yeah, and the problem is coaches, GMs, whatever, athletic directors don't know, and they just are stuck on, hey, so-and-so is slow in the third period, he needs to run more. Well, that's the worst thing you can do, and that makes him even slower. And, even though we know, because this is what we do every day, trying to convince a coach still to this day is very difficult. So for your listeners, what that really is like an 800. Now, we wouldn't have them run an 800, but meaning 800 is sort of that energy system that is the closest thing between anaerobic and aerobic, right? So that's where we like our sled work to kind of be, in that sweet spot of that energy system. And that sort of keeps them out of being lactic until the later in the summer when we want to get closer. Mm-hmm. You want to get away from the more specific things they do. So that's why, when people that are not, trained in training hockey players think, oh, let's put them on a slide board because that's just like hockey. Mm-hmm. Well, that's, too specific to what they already do. Yeah. So why overuse that pattern? So if we were to even use that sort of motion, that would be way early in the summer when they're not doing it. And then when they get closer to the specific skills of their sport, you then get away from those in the gym and help them on things that they're not doing.
Build the stereo, then put the CD in after, right?
Right.
Make the speakers bigger, make the wires better. This is all stuff that I learned from you when I was 20 years old, I'll tell you. And so let's talk a little bit about how you progress people, because the progression, the peaking, all these things are so critically important, because at each phase when you're training people, you're trying to accomplish something different. And like you said, sometimes their performance may drop in certain areas. So walk me through, if it just so happened I was actually a good hockey player, and what would happen if I came in and it said, okay, Ben, I need to get better at hockey?
Obviously the first thing we do with everybody is a full assessment. And the assessment is not just performance, it's more limb to limb, joint by joint. And we're looking at obviously the hips are the big thing with hockey, but then, shoulders and the shoulder and the hip are a lot the same. So, we're looking at hockey, the internal rotation of the hip is very poor. And then on the shoulders, from getting hit all the time, we're seeing really bad shoulder mobility and really bad wrists as well. I mean, very few hockey players can do Olympic lifting just for the fact that not only are they poor in their technique, but it's because of the fact that most of them can't even get, this is what I deal with all day, every day for 20 years. And I'm telling you, 90% from kids on up can't do a front rack position because they have no mobility in their wrists. Their shoulders are messed up. Their ankles, the ankle and foot, because of the skate, there's no dorsiflexion. So these are typically the areas that we have to really work on. So literally from the ground up. Then we test on ice, off ice, different performance. So we look more at structural stuff and then move on to, our KPIs, what we deem for upper body, lower body. Once that's done, obviously they're now on a program. Hockey players have the mentality of just, go for bore, throw up, that was a good workout. I didn't throw up, it wasn't a good workout. I want to run stairs. I want to, shoot 200 pucks. I want to sweat during the workout. And, what people, as I've gotten older and older and really fine-tune workouts, and as athletes get older, I think one of the keys is to actually do less and really focus on changing the intensity. And so one thing we've scaled in, we still have the same exercise template that you back 20 years ago, but, we've scaled it where we now have on it power, velocity to keep track of those. But we also have RPI now, which RPE, rate of perceived exertion.
Right.
And so we'll put on there, and it, for your listeners, what that means is roughly really quick, if I say 7, that means I want you to have 3 reps in the tank, but still it's based on our tempo. Well, and there shouldn't be a thing in everybody's workout, at least in my world, in performance, as a finisher. You don't have to, one thing that people need to take away, and I'm telling you, no matter how much you tell them, they just can't. It's like, you will be better off, stronger and faster, not crushing yourself every single workout. Mm-hmm. And why? Adrenal fatigue and increasing cortisol is a big, big problem, especially now with stress of jobs and the world and lack of sleep. And to just then go on top of that and just crush yourself in a workout, doesn't make sense. But, strength coaches are fighting for getting athletes, and they feel like, putting somebody on the prowler till they puke or breathe, whatever the case may be, is the answer. Now, yes, there's a time and a place for that, and there's a time and a place for training to failure, but you need to have the concept of overall controlling your RPE and the intensity of your workouts. And we're able to then, keep track of everything, and really, it's not simple, but we've simplified it to the point where we really understand it really well, because it's all put into a nice package.
We're talking hockey training with Ben Prentiss, the go-to strength coach for NHL hockey players. We'll be right back after this break. Let's continue our chat with Ben Prentiss, founder of Prentiss Hockey Performance and strength and conditioning consultant for the New York Rangers. In this segment, we talk about what athletes really need and that many don't make it to the intensity of training we see in the commercials. Ben also talks about the widely misused training tool called Plyometrics, which involves jumping and hopping that uses the body's stretch reflex of our muscles to propel the athlete and develop power. He talks about the best ways to use these exercises, why grip training is the cherry on top but not the most important thing for hockey, and the benefits of complex movements. There's lots to talk about, so let's get to it.
Well, if we use like an analogy of building a car, it sounds like your first phase is to make sure the frame and all the parts are there in working order. And then you start working on the engine and all the performance pieces after that. So like what comes after you've taken this person, you put them in a structure, they're able to move their body appropriately. What comes next?
Okay, so then, unfortunately people don't want to hear this as well, but some athletes don't get to the Gatorade commercial exercises because, they're too weak to. With that being said, certain people for 3 months won't train plyometrics. And that doesn't mean they're not getting faster. They're going to get faster by getting stronger because they're too weak to train for speed. And that's okay. And that's not they feel like they're being treated a disservice. But, the fact of the matter is if you give a kid who can't squat his body weight, plyos, you're wasting his time and you're doing him a disservice. So, in theory, you come in and we'll work on unilateral work and we'll train small muscles and we'll do, our isometric work and you'll do some aerobic work for recovery, which is barefoot work, which we're looking at your heart rate not getting too high. So we're not putting you in more, where we're making sure that there is recovery there. And then it'll phase out, where then they're going to get into more sled sprinting, where we're changing the load of the sled. And then they'll get into plyometrics. And so slow work gets taken out and higher velocity stuff gets put in with lower force. Mm-hmm. We're fortunate enough to have a 1080, which is, for the lack of a better expression for all of your people out there, it's a robotic system that allows us to, with an iPad at the touch of a button, eccentrically overload. We can go into pure isokinetic, which other than university type machines, you can't do. So for your listeners out there, what that means is I can put any exercise at 0.2 millimeters per speed. And that means for your listeners, no matter how strong you are, that bar is only moving at 0.2. Mm-hmm. And what that does is that's the only way to produce force. And that is a super efficient way to get really strong. Yeah. And you need less reps. You need lots of rest, but it's also something you can do in season because it doesn't cause a lot of damage. So you're looking at 2 reps, and your listeners are going to be like, well, that sounds ridiculous. That's easy. Well, if anybody's ever tried to do a split squat or a squat at 0.2 or 0.1 millimeters per second, you feel like your spleen's going to come out, and that's set. So that 1 rep will take you 10 seconds.
Yeah, right. Right. And I think that you've already said some things that are really key. You've debunked some of the typical, these are the exercises like the bench press and all those things you don't need to have. And that no matter what, every 4 weeks you change, just because the program says to change, which I think is massive. You talk about different types of contraction. So using exercises in different ways to elicit different responses and then tweaking that as they start to adapt and they go forward. And also about talking about things at different speeds, because I think that, there is still that old school philosophy towards things that they're going to do all these lunges sideways and we're going to do some twists and then we're going to work on our wrist grip to make sure that we can do things.
That's another one that just drives me crazy is that, look, grip training is important for life. Like our parents should train grip. I mean, if you have a dynamometer, we use that for measuring fatigue. It's a great way to measure unilateral grip strength for in-season fatigue. We've used that with our teams that I've had, but specific training for grip is good. Why? Because it's obviously recruiting a lot of motor units and we're getting strong and it's a good neural exercise. But for hockey specifically, you don't need a grip crushing grip. You actually need more work with radiation and deviation and supination and pronation and strengthen the forearms rather than pure grip. So, again, that's the misconception to sort of obviously we use thick grip things because we want our athletes to be strong anyway. But the point is more to train sort of the forearm and the mobility and strength of the wrist rather than pure grip strength. But again, you have to look at your training economy and who you have. So if, a weak 14, 15-year-old, don't waste your training economy on grip strength. You have to stay with compound movements that'll sort of cover those things. And then, I like to call that sort of the cherry on the top in terms of when they've gotten, obviously they can get stronger by just doing chin-ups with thicker grips and doing those things. So
no, that's critically important to understand some of those things. A couple of things I wouldn't mind chatting about too would be you quickly talked on plyometrics, and I think plyometrics are kind of a exercise that people think are cool, and they're doing them. Maybe explain how you can actually fatigue the nervous system by doing too much. You talked about ground contacts and doing 200. Why is that not helpful for people?
Sure. So the whole I'll try to go in layman's terms.
Sure.
It is. The whole point of plyometrics is to increase the stretch reflex. So if you're thinking about a depth jump, which is probably the most advanced plyometric, you're starting off with, say, a 6-inch box only. Our rule for depth jump is you have to jump as high as the box you're jumping off of to then move up. So what a depth jump is you're kind of falling off the box, and when you're touching, you want to get off of the ground as quick as you possibly can. So a general rule of thumb is, your heels shouldn't touch the ground in most plyometric exercises. Mm-hmm. And what that is the stretch reflex. And then you're looking for, in most exercises, is sort of triple extension of the ankle, the knee, and the hip. And why? Because that's what we've seen translates to sports. So, plyometric requires very little reps and a lot of sets and a lot of rest. And, one of the things strength coaches aren't comfortable with, which I tell my young guys, is you have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable sort of time where you just have an athlete sit there for 2 to 3 minutes, because it's an uncomfortable, weird thing. And, to sit there and say, okay, 4 jumps, now sit there for 3 minutes. Well, this is boring. Well, I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here to get you better. This jumping around for fatigue is not a real thing. I mean, that's not plyometrics. Plyometrics are to make you stronger and more explosive by using the stretch reflex. Now, mm-hmm. One could argue, well, Ben, there's no stretch reflex on the ice because there's no friction coefficient of the ice. There is none. That there is no stretch reflex, so why do plyometrics? And the whole point is, well, you're still applying force into the boot. You're still applying force into the ground off the ice, which will then translate in the ice. We've seen time and time again through research that the athlete that jumps the highest skates the fastest. And we've seen it over and over again. Even our heavier athletes still, if they're the fastest guys, they jump the highest. We see it over and over and over again. Now, that doesn't mean they're the best hockey player, but us as a strength coach is still telling us, okay, we're doing our job. If this guy jumps the highest in the gym, he jumps the highest broad jump, he has the fastest 10, or he's among the top 3 in all of the above, we know now that this guy can skate fast.
We're here with Ben Prentiss, hockey strength and conditioning expert. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to our conversation with Ben Prentiss, NHL strength training expert. He's been sharing his approach to training hockey players of all levels for the last 20 years. In this final segment, we'll talk about the importance of sprinting speed for hockey players, the role of stretching and mobility, as well as some must-do tips for any aspiring hockey players so they can get stronger and improve performance. Let's hear what he has to say.
We did a study at the university here, actually, and sprinting speed was the number one determinant of who was a fast skater. And if you think about that, that is lowest amount of time on the ground. Their heel isn't hitting, they're moving their feet quickly, and their ground reaction is low. And that's the expression of speed, right?
Right. Well, and there you go. I mean, again, a lot of times we don't need we look at research, but we don't rely on it, or because we're kind of ahead of it. And It's good to see when universities come around it. But we also have many, people coming through to use. So, and if you remember, back 20 years ago, we didn't run hockey players at all, other than sort of in the first phase where they would do more like aerobic work. And as I've gone on in the years, I still don't have them run. Why? Because they're terrible, terrible runners. And if you try to sort of, and number 2, the reason we run 10s is because 10s, if we've seen mimics, we've slowed down on ice, and on ice, you have about 8 propulsion strides until you sort of hit your top speed. Mm-hmm. And that mimics the running off ice, which you just said. But, it sort of took us a while to get to that point. And they're not going to get hurt. That could almost be a warm-up because it activates your central nervous system. So sprinting before you squat, if you're giving yourself enough time, could potentiate that squat because it's a high CNS thing. But again, each sprint needs 2 to 3 minutes after a 10-yard sprint. You're not doing it for conditioning. You're doing it to get faster.
Well, that's the connection between the brain and the muscle, right? That's what you're training right there, not the muscle at that point.
Correct. Exactly. And that's why we're talking about your CNS. So, and we've seen if you get anything higher than that, you're looking at hamstring pulls and you're looking at terrible form. And, again, we talk about training economy. If you want to spend your entire off season coaching your athlete trying to run, you're really doing him a disservice. So, at 10 yards, getting him stronger and training sort of the things we talked about from the foot all the way up will make him faster in his 10. And then typically the slowest guys are the slowest guys on the ice. So, we've made it a point that, over the years, we are not going to do anything in the gym that's not going to affect them on the ice, which I think gets lost in training when young guys are looking to train people and they're looking at YouTubes or Instagrams and they're just kind of throwing things in. We're at a level where we can't afford to do that. So if you came to our gym, you will know that every single thing I'm giving you is tried and true, and it's going to make you better on the ice, whether it be our mobility day where we're just doing mobility, or like I said, the 10-yard sprint or 10-meter sprint, or however you want to say.
You just said something that actually I was going to mention as well. Mobility sounds like you're using that term almost interchangeably with stretching or flexibility, but it sounds like it's functional.
Right. Well, and those are, remember, for your listeners, those are different. What's more important, being flexible or mobile? For hockey players, the majority of them, A, hate to stretch, and then B, are super tight to begin with. And then C, generally speaking, if you don't, layman's terms, stretch 5 times a week, generally you're not going to make a difference in that tissue and you're wasting your time. So, a half an hour stretch or a 10-minute stretch at your end of the workout is not going to do anything for you in terms of changing that tissue. You'll have a temporary relief. Static stretching has a different change on tissue than dynamic stretching. So what we do is we call them fillers. And unfortunately for the athlete, I say, hey, you don't want to stretch and you don't want to come to our stretches, then I'm going to take out an exercise and I'm going to emphasize this stretch because you are at risk with your lack of internal rotation that you will get hurt. So I'm going to force this, again, lack of a better word, stretching on you to and take away exercise. And you're going to continue to do this because you're not going to do it on your own. It's hard. It needs to be coached. We have very specific myofascial stretching that we do. And we have different types of, we've done all the FRC, which is the functional range conditioning, which is Dr. Spina out of Toronto that's created this system. So we use that. We use, obviously, El Dois, which when you were with us, we still use for Guy Voyer is a brilliant osteopath out of Quebec. So we've sort of taken all of that and integrated it with diaphragmatic breathing and, again, posturology, but not get too excited with it where we're like, only do that. The problem is when you teach a modality, that's the only thing you want people to use. The science of it is picking specifically how much certain people need. Again, most women like to stretch a lot, and some of them, guess what, don't need it at all. And it could be harmful for them, where they need to create some type of muscle mass and strength rather than the stretching. So it's important to see that, especially with the girl hockey players that we have, in terms of joint laxity and developing some muscle mass rather than stretching. So it's about knowing your athlete and incorporating not only flexibility, but mobility and using that sort of in the right areas.
Right. Well, I mean, so, we're starting to wind down here, but what I was wondering, obviously nutrition has been important. You stress that. You stress the importance of sleep, especially for kids, because sleep hygiene is so critically important. You talk about drinking water, some of those basic things. Generalizations in training, obviously that is not your approach. But if a kid wants to be safe and they want to start to look into getting better conditioning, where would they start?
I would say the first thing is to sort of swallow your ego, think of the weights with no numbers on them, and train for full range of motion. That would be number one. So like for us, when we squat, they start with what's called a Frankenstein squat, where you're just your arms out in front of you and the bar is underneath your chin. And the strength will come with the load, but don't let the range of motion. And, okay, well, I can't get there. I'm too tight. I'm pinching here. I've closed range pain here. Okay, Step back. Now let's go to full range split squats. Let's train barefoot where we're looking at our foot, doing a short foot, activating our foot, getting the knee over the toe, full range of motion, and then you increase some weight. But let's follow the tempo. And you can use the same weight week to week and still get stronger because the time under tension changes. So whether it be a 5-second hold on your iso day on a peak muscle contraction or a 5-second eccentric, you're changing different tissue, but you're using the same weight. So you're still getting strong. So for young kids, stop worrying about the weight. You're not going to get strong by that way. You're going to get strong if you have the patience. Now it's hard because chances are in their gym, they're going to be the only one doing that. But in the long term, your hips, your shoulders, your groin will be far better if you can get full range of motion. Then when you get older in your early 20s, you'll be able to use load because you can then get into position. I can't tell you how many pros we have that I won't let squat because they can't get into that position. And it's too late. It's too late. They're 27 years old. So we have to get split squats and step ups and things like that because they can't get into the position. So elevating your heels is a good way to start to sort of take out your tight calves and to get full range of motion. But get rid of the ego and go for full range of motion would be number one. Number two would be, really use that RPE and not go to failure all the time and leave some in the tank. And if you're young, give yourself a day off after each training session. And then as you get older, you can sort of train back to back. But in the beginning, I think training every other day for younger athletes is much better. You'll get stronger quicker and you'll have more recovery. I think those would be simple things that they can do that they probably don't want to do. They want to chase the pump, so to speak. And, for younger kids that are interested in that, then, give yourself 15 minutes at the end of a workout for quote unquote beach work. And then, sort of eat your vegetables first and then have your dessert after.
Awesome. I love that. That's great. And when you become a pro hockey player, they can come down and train with you. So then they're all set.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for taking the time today, Ben. I really appreciate it.
Good to see you. And thank you for having me.
Well, for all the hockey players, coaches, trainers, and parents listening, I hope you learned something you can apply to your training for the upcoming hockey season. I think that Ben's message resonates the importance of seeking the right advice and the role that patience, tracking, and an individualized approach plays for any athlete. Now, all of us aren't pro hockey players, but there's lots of us that are trying to improve our sport performance, and this glimpse into the science of how it's done should make us all a bit more curious about what we're doing. I'd like to thank Ben for taking the time to chat and for letting me be a part of what he built all those years ago. I think it's safe to say that we all need coaches. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Wall. We'll see you next week for another episode of the Wellness and Healthy Lifestyle Show on your VOCM.